Welcome viewers to Mr. Anderson Says. I'm Mr. Anderson, and in this video, I have a whole bunch to say about Sam Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy. With the multiverse bursting wide open, I thought I would refresh my memory with the original Spider-Man films. There is so much potential for all the different branches of the Spider-Verse to succeed, and I can't wait to see what surprises are in store. Before we begin, let's say hi to my co-host, P. Josh. Hey P. Josh, what do you hope to see in a future Spider-Verse film? Scarlet Spider, he's my favorite too! I loved the Clone Saga storyline, and the parts where Ben Reilly is uncertain if he's the real Peter Parker or not. I really connected with his loss of identity and having to rebuild who you are. For sure, his costume is awesome. So, in my look back at the original trilogy, I plan to point out some of the greatest moments and some of the worst that this particular Spider-Man story brought into the world. Quick spoiler warning, if you have not seen Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy, I will be talking about plot points from all three movies, so close this window if that will spoil anything for you. Also, if you've been online and haven't had it spoiled for you in the 14 years since the third one was released, then you have some mad internet surfing skills and I want to learn from you. Now that the spoiler warning is done, let's dig into the greatest and worst moments of Sam Raimi's Spider-Man. One of the greatest aspects of this film trilogy is the heroic musical score. Danny Elfman does an amazing job creating a unique score to follow the action and drama of this Spider-Man trilogy. After the work he did with Tim Burton on the original Batman films, it's no wonder he was able to bring an amazing score to this film series too. The moment when Peter learns he can climb on walls is one of the most memorable moments in film history for me, and a lot of that has to do with the feeling Elfman's score built behind the scene. Just listen to this crescendo. His score for this trilogy could not have been better. Uncle Ben's death has always been a foundational aspect of the character of Spider-Man. Getting to see it happen on screen in the first film and the chase with the robber afterwards was exactly how I imagined it from the comic books. Throughout the trilogy, though, Raimi makes the audience revisit his death again, and again, and again. And in the last movie, they go so far as to retcon the original story of Uncle Ben's death to shoehorn this random connection between Sandman and Spider-Man. We revisit the dead uncle 3 times in the third movie. That's what I call overkilled. Oh, sorry, Milo. Did that joke hurt you physically? The Daily Bugle was an amazing part of this trilogy. J. Jonah Jameson, portrayed by J.K. Simmons, is maybe the most perfect casting of all time, which explains why the modern MCU had him reprise the role. His voice demanding,
"He's a menace to the entire city! I want that wall-crawling arachnid prosecuted! I want him strung up by his web! I want Spider-Man!"
And the flat top with the mustache and cigar? No one can ever play that role as well as J.K. Simmons. They also had Robbie Robertson, played by Bill Nunn, who was not used as much as he should have been. And did you notice Elizabeth Banks playing the secretary in all 3 movies? Just a perfect job constructing the Daily Bugle for the big screen. Harry Osborn's arc through the 3 movies is the worst portrayal I could have ever imagined for this character. In one of the first scenes, we're shown multiple ways that Harry, played by James Franco, is an awful best friend. He's flunked out of every private school he's ever tried so far, and he befriends Peter so he can pass science class. We also find out that he knows of Peter's crush on Mary Jane, but Harry hits on her anyway. Shortly after, we find out Harry's secretly dating Mary Jane and didn't tell Peter about it. We're a half hour in, and it just isn't plausible for Peter to call him his best friend anymore. The whole first film, Harry's an entitled, rich, drunk brat. The second film, he's an orphaned, entitled, rich, drunk CEO, obsessed with hating Spider-Man. And we'll talk about Harry in the third film later. The fight scenes were definitely one of the highest quality parts of this first trilogy. Sam Raimi does exceptionally fun action sequences. The fight with the Green Goblin seamlessly transitions from saving everyone on the bridge into the abandoned house where Peter gets his butt whooped good. Just listen to the sound Peter makes when Goblin knocks the wind out of him. All of the fight scenes with Doc Ock and his arms, especially the fight on the train, were a thrill a second. Even the fights in the third movie were action-packed and fast-paced. I don't understand why Toby ever wore a mask though, considering 2/3 of it got ripped apart in each fight.
They love me.
Then let's hear it for your one.
Peter, played by Tobey Maguire, often seems so selfish and narcissistic that I was barely rooting for him by the end of the trilogy. A lot of the choices he made stemmed from his belief that nothing would ever go his way because he's gotta be Spider-Man. That happened with Peter in the comics to a degree as well, but it always felt like comic Peter understood the need to sacrifice his personal desires for the greater good. In the films, it just feels like Peter's a whiny baby that can't comprehend why everything goes wrong for him. He has this super sad pan shot into his sad apartment window with his saddest face, and he says,
Am I not supposed to have what I want? What I need? What am I supposed to do?
Cry more, superhuman. The entire third movie makes Peter worse, but I'll talk about that in a minute.
Face it, Tiger. You just hit the jackpot.
Mary Jane, portrayed by Kirsten Dunst, was perfectly cast, especially considering all the screen time they gave her. From the first film, it seemed like Sony intended on selling the franchise as a Peter, Mary Jane, Harry trio of co-stars, which meant writing more MJ into the script than fans originally speculated. Kirsten played the part brilliantly, though, keeping her soft-spoken, doe-eyed romantic personality balanced with the fierce, determined attitude that MJ often has in the comics. I still haven't seen anyone deliver the line,
Go get him, Tiger.
as well as she has. One of my biggest problems with this trilogy is told to us in one of the first sentences. Peter is narrating to the audience and says, "This, like any story worth telling, is about a girl." First of all, no. I know plenty of stories that are worth telling that do not have to focus on romantic heterosexual relationships. Hello? Second of all, there are plenty of great Spider-Man comic book storylines that didn't have a thing to do with his romantic life. This theme of "it's about a girl" gets dragged out through the entire Raimi trilogy, as though everything Peter Parker is doing is only to win the heart of Mary Jane. I mentioned how Peter gets his butt whooped fighting the Goblin earlier, but the tide turns when Goblin threatens to torture Mary Jane like a super creep. We're then shown how the love of his girl gave him the strength to win. The romance in this trilogy is only made more unbearable because of the love triangle between Peter, MJ, and Harry that goes right until the very end of the third. Third. I said third, right? So no, the story of Spider-Man is not some torrid romance. It's a superhero story, which sometimes includes romance tangents with Mary Jane, and also Gwen Stacy, Felicia Hardy, and others. Sex doesn't have to be used to sell everything, Hollywood, especially when it overruns what could have been a great story. The Green Goblin, portrayed by Willem Dafoe, and Dr. Octopus, portrayed by Alfred Molina, are two of the greatest on-screen comic book villains to this day, and we have had a ton of on-screen comic book villains. Even with his ridiculous mask on, Willem Dafoe still manages to be maniacal and terrifying. The scene when he hallucinates the Green Goblin's voice is remarkable, watching Dafoe switch seamlessly between the confused and afraid Norman and the insane murderer inside of him. Molina's portrayal of Octavius was stellar as well, showing the character's arc from cold yet compassionate Dr. Octavius to the destructive and driven Doc Ock. The explanation of the AI taking over his brain was the perfect reasoning behind his transition from brilliance to madness, and his final moments where he declares, "I will not die a monster," make him a more sympathetic villain than he was in the comics. The first two villains we got to experience on screen with Spider-Man were absolutely the best. The entire third movie is a complete bomb with a hot mess of shrapnel. It's mostly because Sony forced Raimi to include the character of Venom in his movie, when Raimi had not a thought or care in the world about him. There's a few reasons we have to go through in order to understand this. P. Josh, what's the first major reason I strongly dislike the third Spider-Man?
I'm gonna put some dirt in your eye.
This is the absolute worst version of Peter I've ever seen portrayed in any medium, and I will die on that hill. He's an ignorant boyfriend. He kisses Gwen Stacy right in front of Mary Jane. He's a cocky hero with Sandman. He let his best friend suffer with amnesia because it made his life easier. And that's all before he goes emo in the black suit. To include Venom for Sony, Raimi had to first let the suit take over Peter. Read the comics. Which gave birth to Bully Parker. He's literally an abusive, gaslighting dirtbag once he puts on the black suit. Right after Bully Parker blows up his supposed best friend's face.
Look at little Goblin Jr. Gonna cry?
He brings Gwen to MJ's work to purposely make her jealous, and accidentally smacks MJ to the ground after being told to leave by the bouncer. Bully Parker is the absolute worst. P. Josh, show that part where Bully Parker thinks he's the coolest guy on the street.
How you doing?
I feel the same as the pedestrians who scoffed at him. P. Josh, what's the next problem in the third movie? I was talking before about Harry's awful story arc, but this third movie took an enormous dump on any of the work they did building him up in the other films. First off, he's flying on a snowboard with ski goggles and a retractable flat mask, which is the cheapest version of Green Goblin they could have conceived. Then, for a major chunk of the film, he's either walking around with amnesia or pretending to have it. Finally, when we see him come back to his evil senses, his big villainous plan to defeat Spider-Man? Make Mary Jane break up with him. Amnesia after a crash. Blackmailing a girl to make her break up with her boyfriend? Is this a superhero movie or a soap opera? I feel like I'm watching Spider-Man 90210. What's the last major problem with the third Spider-Man movie, P. Josh? The last thing I'm going to say about Spider-Man 3 is this. It must have sucked for Raimi having Sony force Venom into his movie. You don't even need to read the reports. You should be able to tell just by watching that Eddie Brock does not fit with the rest of Raimi's story. Some of the best franchises have crashed and burned because of the interference from studio heads. But I honestly feel Raimi dropped the ball big time on this one.
Pikachu? Pikachu!
There were many ways he could have put the character in just enough to satisfy the studio, without completely trashing the rest of his Spider-Man story. Instead, he gave us Eric Foreman Venom.
Ooh, my spider sense is tingling. If you know what I'm talking about.
Did he just make Spider Sense into a boner joke? Damn. It's clear Sam Raimi didn't have the first inkling what a symbiote was or what audiences were expecting to see with Venom on screen. He completely ruined what could have been a breakthrough opportunity if he cared enough to do his job. Gosh, Sam.
You had one job. Just the one.
So, there's Mr. Anderson's greatest and worst from Sam Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy. There's plenty of stuff I didn't get to mention that I still love in these films, and more stuff to make you cringe. I'll always be nostalgic about the first time I got to see Spider-Man on screen, but rewatching them now sure opened my eyes to a lot of the problems in this trilogy. Despite its flaws, I'll always be grateful we had it, because we wouldn't have been able to have No Way Home without it. I hope you had a great time revisiting the Wallcrawlers original trilogy with me. If you decide to rewatch them yourself after this, come back and leave a comment on my video of any observations you want to share. If you disagreed with me wholeheartedly, then I definitely want to hear about that in the comments. Just keep it respectful, please. Kids watch Spider-Man content, remember? For more reviews, news, and rumors in the world of entertainment, check back with my channel for these red videos. Hey Josh, what else should the viewers do? Thanks, P. Josh, and thank you, viewers, for watching all the way through. A special thanks to the Cosmic Crew, Warren, Chris, and Alli, for encouraging me to make entertainment content for my channel. You taught me a lot, and viewers, I'll post link to their channels below. I appreciate all of you so much for the support you've given me, so keep a lookout for more red videos coming soon, and remember, keep it balanced, friends. Go get 'em, tiger.